was an act of British Parliament in 1756 that got revenue from the American colonies by imposing a stamp on newspapers and legal and commercial documents.
The American Revolution was a conflict between the 13 colonies and Great Britain in 1775. No particular event led to the American Revolution because it was a disagreement between Great Britain and the colonists on how they should be treated.
Coming of the American Revolution, major events: French and Indian War, Proclamation of 1763, the Sugar Act, Currency Act, Stamp Act Congress, Townshed Act, Boston Tea Party, Lexington/Concord, and more.
In the next two segments, we will see how taxation without representation and the invasion of privacy in one's home brought the colonists to war with Britain.
It seemed harmless enough. A little stamp on legal documents. Certainly not something that would launch a revolution. But the Stamp Act of 1765, part of a series of taxes imposed by Britain on her American colonies, did just that. It started the American Revolution. 2 years before, Britain had won the French and Indian War, gaining Canada and the Mississippi River Basin from France. But the cost of the war had been high. Now the country was experiencing an economic depression, and the government was in debt. Britain's new Lord of the Treasury, George Grenville, drew up a plan to reduce that debt through a series of taxes on the colonies. At the time, Americans were the least taxed people in the Western world, and the British Parliament thought that the colonies would go along with new taxes to help the mother country. However, the British government made two fundamental mistakes. It did not understand the sentiment on taxation in the colonies, and it misjudged its own supremacy over America. The reaction to the Stamp Act was explosive. Since the Stamp Act required a fee or tax for all documents and newspapers, it affected every aspect of colonial life from commerce to marriage. To get the stamp, one needed to pay the government. Virginia reacted first. A young Patrick Henry, one of the great heroes of the American Revolution, rose in the Virginia House of Burgesses to read 7 resolutions against the Stamp Act. Old Guard members of the House reacted with cries of treason, to which Patrick Henry answered, "If this be treason, then make the most of it." Henry's resolutions against the Stamp Act were printed and widely circulated throughout the colonies. The reaction was at once momentous and even violent. In the fall of 1765, what became known as the Stamp Act Congress convened in New York. It consisted of representatives from 9 of the colonies. It was the first time the colonies had come together on their own. After 2.5 weeks, they accepted the right of the British Parliament to make laws for them, but rejected its right to tax them. Other reactions to the Stamp Act were more violent. Mobs calling themselves the Sons of Liberty attacked tax distributors, ransacking their homes and businesses. Britain's reaction to colonial protests were ambiguous. At that moment, Britain could have taken control of the colonies, but it did not. Instead, in the name of expediency, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act without it really ever taking effect. In that moment, the colonies were lost. The American Revolution had begun, and most of the British did not even know it, and a little stamp took its monumental place in history.